Welcome to the Pisces New Moon forecast workshop. It's been feeling like spring is about to start. Where I live in Nevada City in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, it's you can just feel that beginning edge of spring, and there are little green leaves beginning to unfurl. There are dark purple buds on the branches, and it really felt like the turn of the seasons was here. And then just yesterday, this thick blanket of snow came in and has completely transformed the world again into this beautiful wintry landscape, and it feels so magical and enchanted. And the sunlight has been coming through the trees in just the most extraordinary way, where it's catching the branches, these kind of crystalline branches, and sparkling. The air itself seems to be sparkling. And as today has progressed, it's been a fairly warm, sunny day, bright blue sky, big puffy clouds, and the snow has just been falling off the branches. And so there's this continual kind of sparkling drip of water and ice and snow. And as I've been observing it, I went for a walk before opening up the workshop, and I've been working really hard lately, and so I've barely gotten outside. And I just knew today that I had to enjoy the snow while it was here. And so I went for a walk on one of the paths near my house, and as I was looking at everything and just seeing this exquisite beauty, I realized, oh, this is the Sun, Venus, Neptune, the triple conjunction that we have in the sky right now, where Venus Neptune can have that quality of ethereal, sacred, otherworldly beauty. And when it's combined with the sun, there's an emphasis on it, there's a focus on it. But also, we have to remember with these archetypal principles that they can come through in a more literal way. And so what I've been observing all day is the sun itself, the sunlight, but it has been tinged with this Venusian, Neptunian, crystalline beauty. And that's my own situated experience here. But I want to invite you, wherever in the world that you are, whether you are in an urban area or a city, whether you're in the high desert or on the coast, to observe the world around you and to see, can you recognize these archetypes coming through in the very air itself and how you are able to perceive what surrounds you? And it can be an extraordinary exercise in archetypal perception, developing the archetypal eye, as James Hillman calls it, our capacity to recognize these universal principles coming through whatever our immediate particular experiences are. And that Venus Neptune alignment is just getting closer and closer. It's fairly tight today. There was an exact Sun Neptune conjunction yesterday, Wednesday, but Saturday's new moon. So the new moon will be very early in the morning on March 13th. So depending on your time zone, it could be quite late March 12th or very early March 13th. And the new moon happens to align on the same day as the exact Venus-Neptune conjunction. And so these beautiful, exquisite kind of sacred qualities are infusing the Pisces new moon. And Pisces already has this watery Neptunian quality to it. And so we're just being infused in this bath of beauty right now. And it's worth drifting off into reverie and daydream to enjoy it, because some of the more reality-based or practical or literal expressions may be a little bit harder to access when we're in this dreamy, dissolved space. So that is how our lunation cycle is beginning as we prepare for the Pisces new moon. And for those of you who work with new moon intentions or new moon rituals, this particular alignment can bring in a lot because it's coming from this transcendent place and this exquisitely beautiful heart chakra oriented place as well. So I want to acknowledge that we're coming up on a year, the anniversary of the coronavirus lockdowns, and that may be bringing up complex emotions and feelings in response to really the whole world has been in the grip of this pandemic. And as these dates start to pass by, as different regions uh, brought their lockdowns in last year, we may be having memories of what it felt like at this time a year ago to enter into a space of the unknown and the frightening, and um, that we are still very much finding our footing. We understand so much more about this virus at this time, but there is still a mystery, and there are still um, looming questions and challenges, not only in terms of this pandemic, but what it means to navigate a world where there may be more pandemics, more viruses, as climate change and ecological catastrophe continues to unfold. How do we orient and live in this world and yet find meaning within that? And so I just want to acknowledge that the amount of suffering and loss that has unfolded in this last year for so many people, and really to hold space for those who have left this world in this last year, for those who have died, who have passed beyond um, the realm of incarnation, and that we live in a culture that is so frightened of and resistant to death and dying that it's very difficult for us to look at it directly, and not only to um, really incorporate into our lives, our living experience, what death is. Um, but also, we miss some of the beauty, the numinosity, the mystery of it because of that fear. And I just wanted to take a moment here to just sit in reverence and just a few moments of silence and acknowledgement for all of those who have died from this pandemic and from other causes as well in the last year. So if it feels comfortable, I just want to invite you to close your eyes and take a deep breath and hold that sacred prayer for those who have left us and who have become part of the greater cosmos once more. Thank you for doing that with me. I also wanted to mention at the beginning of this forecast that this is my penultimate workshop of this kind, penultimate, second to last. Um, and actually, I was supposed to offer the first of these workshops last year for the Aries New Moon. But because of the pandemic and the uncertainty around it, I was supposed to have this as an in-person event in Nevada City, and we decided to postpone it. And so I started off with, instead of beginning with Aries, which is kind of the astrological new year, instead we began with Taurus. And so I will be finishing up with the Aries Taurus lunation next month. So the Aries new moon will be the conclusion of this particular format, this kind of workshop. And I'll go on to offer other things, including the class that I mentioned in the last workshop. But I just wanted uh, to share that this journey that so many of you have been taking with me all year long is starting to come to a conclusion. As I looked at the themes for this lunation cycle, the Pisces new moon, the transition of the sun into Aries, and then the rest of the lunation cycle, concluding with the new moon in Aries, I noticed a few interesting themes. And one of them is that none of the planets are in retrograde for the entire month. And this is unusual. None of the outer planets and none of the inner planets are retrograde, meaning that they don't look like they are moving backwards compared to their normal orbital motion. They're all going forward, which I found quite fascinating. And the first planet actually that will station and turn retrograde is Pluto, but not until April 26th. So, not until well into the next lunation cycle. And I found that to be quite significant. No retrogrades for this whole month. And it's at the same time as we transition into Aries season. We transition from the end of winter to the beginning of spring. And so right now we're still in Pisces season. And when we look at the winter signs, as the sun moves first from the cardinal sign at the beginning of winter of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, then to the fixed sign of Aquarius, also traditionally ruled by Saturn. And then now the end of winter, Pisces, which is a water sign, and a mutable water sign ruled by Jupiter. I always think of that progression. It's Saturn, Saturn, and then a watery Jupiter sign. And it's almost like you get that cold winter, the frozen nature of Saturn in Capricorn and Aquarius season. And then as we move toward the end of winter, the water comes in. Those icy snows begin to melt. And then we head toward the first sign of spring, Aries. And Aries is a cardinal sign, it initiates the season, and also it is a fire sign. It is a fire sign ruled by Mars, so really charging forward the beginning of spring. It's also the sign where the sun is exalted, where the sun can be seen as the honored guest in Mars's home. And so if you think of the sun and Mars, this is a lot of heat. This is a lot of fire. It's a lot of warmth, melting those winter snows and bringing in the spring. And so that is the transition point that this particular lunation cycle covers. And how significant that during this time of melting and ignition and opening up into a new season, that warming, the earth itself warming and bringing forth new life, that there are no retrogrades. That seems to symbolize this quality of moving forward. And however you can see applying that in your life, or maybe already recognizing it in your life, what are the projects and the activities and the ways of being in the world that are moving forward for you without inhibition? None of the planets are inhibited in that way, being in retrograde. They're all moving steadily forward. And even Saturn, who is our archetypal principle of reminding us, don't be hasty, don't move too fast. Even Saturn is also moving direct at this time. Another theme that I noticed for this lunation cycle is that there are so many sextiles. Now, a sextile is a 60-degree angle between two planets. It is the smallest and the gentlest of the major aspects. So the major aspects being the conjunction, the opposition, the square, the trine, and then the sextile. The sextile is just half the length of the trine. So the trine is 120 degrees. It's our more potent soft aspect. And then the sextile is our more subtle soft aspect. And what defines a sextile is that when you look at a sextile between two signs, they're always complementary elements, meaning that if a planet is in, say, an earth sign and it's sextile to another planet, that other planet will be in a water sign. So these complementary elements of earth and water, or the other two complementary elements, are air and fire. So sextiles are always in complementary elements with the signs that they're located in. And so as I was going through and I was looking through all the different transits that will grace us throughout this month, I was really amazed at how many sextiles were there. I think I tallied a total of 12 sextiles that will unfold in the course of this lunation. And I think part of why we're seeing so many different sextiles right now is that if you recall, there was a large pile up of planets in Aquarius at the beginning of the last lunation, such a massive stellium of multiple planets in the sign of Aquarius. And as the faster moving planets have pulled away from the slower moving planets in that sign, so as Mercury and Venus and the sun, the moon, all move away from the slower moving planets located in Aquarius, so Jupiter and Saturn. As they pull away, they move 1, 2 signs over and then start to form that sextile. And the nature of the sextile is one of confluence, of harmony. It's a gift that's being offered to us, and we have the opportunity to take it, but we also may forget that it's being offered to us. It doesn't demand our attention in the way that a square does or an opposition does. A sextile is like this offering of, here's some energy that's going to balance out and work well together. You're welcome to take it. You don't have to, but you're welcome to. And so we're being offered many of these sextiles right now, and have the opportunity to take up these different archetypal complexes in a more easeful way. So after I move through my usual journey of the lunation cycle, moving from new moon to waxing quarter to full moon to waning quarter and the next new moon, showing you the transits there, then I'll just name what these different sextiles are, the days they land, so that you have a sense of the dance of the sextiles that are unfolding during this particular lunation. So let me share my screen so that we can both be looking at our transits for the month ahead. So here we are, the Pisces new moon, which will take place on very early in the morning on March 13th. And so here's the new moon in Pisces, sun conjunct moon. And there you can see the Venus-Neptune conjunction as well, which later that day will perfect its alignment also. So this is really the initiation of the cycle, as I was talking about. And just to give you a glimpse as well of some of the other placements I've been speaking about here thus far, we can see that Saturn and Jupiter are still in Aquarius. As I'm speaking, Mercury's in Aquarius as well, but it's going to be quickly moving out, ingressing into the sign of Pisces not too long from now. It will ingress on March 15th, so on Monday. And Mercury actually moves very quickly throughout this lunation cycle. You may recall that Mercury was retrograde in Aquarius, so it spent a good amount of time, several weeks in Aquarius, whereas it's going to be moving at its rapid clip as it crosses first into Pisces on March 13th, and then it'll traverse that watery sign, which I think will really allow us to kind of let slip some of our mental acuity in some ways. It's a very dreamy place for Mercury to be. And it'll swim across that sign fairly quickly and then enter Aries by April 3rd. So a very fast journey that Mercury is making, swimming through Pisces. When I think of Mercury swimming through Pisces, I think of one of those flying fish, and that's skimming its way across the water. So Mercury won't be there too much longer, but Saturn and Jupiter will be holding down the fort in Aquarius for some time. And so now moving forward, to the waxing quarter moon. Here we are. It takes place on March 21st. And this is just the day after the sun moves into Aries. So the sun will move into Aries on March 20th. So that March 20th marks the beginning of spring. It also is the um, so it marks the vernal equinox, when the day and night are of equal length. And it's also International Astrology Day, something I just recently learned, which makes a lot of sense. In some ways, it's like the astrological new year when the sun moves into Aries, because uh, Aries is usually the sign that we mark as the beginning of the zodiac. And so it's the beginning of the sun's journey through the zodiac. And so it has been hallowed now as International Astrology Day. And it's nice, just in the same way as we mark the new year, January 1st, and we have our celebrations for that. And then many cultures mark the Lunar New Year several weeks after that. Many Asian cultures will celebrate the Lunar New Year. And so let's say you weren't able to set all your New Year's intentions with January 1st, but you have this opportunity with the Lunar New Year. And here again, we have another opportunity to start over, to start afresh with the astrological New Year and the beginning of the sun moving into Aries and the start of spring. So if there's any intentions or resolutions or initiatives that you really wish you'd started January 1st or with the Lunar New Year, guess what? You have another opportunity to do so on March 20th. And so right on the heels of the sun entering into Aries, then we arrive at the waxing quarter moon. And the waxing quarter moon will take place in the cardinal sign of Cancer, right there at the beginning of the sign. And the moon rules Cancer. So the moon is at home when it is in this particular sign, square to the sun, which is exalted in Aries. And so this waxing quarter carries a lot of energy in the sense that the sun is able really to shine as itself and as the celebrated, honored guest in Mars's home of Aries. And now it is in that kind of tension-filled square to the moon, but the moon can hold its own because it's home. It's in the sign of Cancer. And that any intentions, initiatives that we have unfolding with this lunation cycle, I think will be given a burst of energy with this waxing quarter. And that along with there not being any retrogrades, this really is a good opportunity to move forward, to push forward with projects, with ideas, with initiatives, with intentions. This day of the waxing quarter moon in Cancer is also a very astrologically rich day. There are multiple exact alignments or specific transits taking place on this one day, March 21st. So one of them is Mercury. So at this point now, Mercury is already in Pisces. Remember, it moved into Pisces on March 15th. And it is forming an exact sextile to Uranus in Taurus. And so here's one of our many sextiles. Mercury sextile Uranus has the quality of awakening the mind, liberating ideas, bringing new insights. We can feel our mental activity quicken and become electrified with Mercury Uranus. And so if you feel like your mental activity is heightened and very quick and maybe also easily distracted, that's one of the qualities of Mercury Uranus. But because it's a sextile, one of our many sextiles that we're experiencing in this lunation, it can be more of the sudden, radical, exciting new insight or idea, but that you can more easily draw upon or bring into initiative. It's not so much the the rapidly moving, distracted mind that is a hindrance or a frustration. Rather, this comes with more ease. So I would suggest to mark this day and the few days around it, of course, because Mercury will enter the orb of influence with Uranus a couple days before and stick around with it for a couple days after. So, as you've often heard me say, transits don't start like a light switch being flipped on. They fade into our awareness, they peak that with their potency, and then they fade out. And so, this Mercury Uranus alignment may give you some new ideas that you want to bring forward at the start of this spring season. The next significant transit that's happening on this exact day is that Venus ingresses into Aries. So Venus has been exalted in Pisces, honored guest in Jupiter's home for some time, and now moves into the realm of Aries, where she's a little bit less comfortable. Um, the reason for that is because Aries is a Mars ruled sign, and Aries is opposite to Libra, which is Venus's home sign, one of Venus's home signs. And so, being in that opposite sign from home, Venus may not be able to express her nature as fully. That being said, Venus and Mars, as we know, make excellent lovers. And so, while Venus may not be luxuriating in rose petal filled bathtubs like she was during Pisces season, she instead may be feeling a little bit more friction, a little bit more heat. And we know that Venus can still hold her own in those spaces. She just might need to use more of Mars's tactics to do so. Last year, when Venus moved through Mars, I used this image, or when Venus moved through Aries, excuse me, I used this image to illustrate it of a rose caught on fire. And while the rose may not be very comfortable caught on fire, it's also a very evocative image. Think of the tango dancer with a rose between her teeth, dancing the sensual dance. So that is Venus moving through the sign of Aries, which again is a Mars ruled sign. So we've covered the mind, Mercury, sextile to Uranus, Venus, the heart, moving into the sign of Aries, and now yet another significant alignment on this day, the will, Mars itself, which is currently in Gemini, is sextile, excuse me, not a sextile this time, is trine to Saturn. And this confluent angle between Mars and Saturn, the trine, can be a more supportive way for these two energies to come into balance. A metaphor that I will often draw on for Mars with Saturn is the fire that is burned down to the embers. And that fire can endure through the long night. And so Mars with Saturn is about measured energy, it is disciplined action. It's taking the time to slow down before taking initiative or before moving forward. Saturn brings in structure, organization, discipline, and hard work to Mars's impulse uh, to charge forward. And so, actually, in some ways, this may be a bit of a blessing that Saturn is pulling the reins in on Mars, just as the Sun and Venus are moving into Mars's sign of Aries, because it just tempers things a little bit, keeps it in balance. If Mars is going to show up as aggression or as anger, Saturn says, give it a moment. And so it points us toward non-violent expressions, non-violent communication. Saturn is what brings in the non, the negation, the not to Mars, violence. So non-violence is a Mars-Saturn expression. And that's something that we can turn towards as this alignment is in the sky. Now, this one I think we'll feel actually for a few weeks because of the pace that Mars moves at, but it makes it its exact trine, its exact alignment on March 21st. So this waxing quarter moon is so potent. Not only is the sun exalted square to the moon in rulership, but it's the same day that the mind, the heart, and the will, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, are all having significant transits. Those three, by the way, um, the Mercury, Venus, and Mars, I always like to draw in a wonderful archetypal story to remind us of the nature of these three inner planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. And that's the Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz tells the story of a solar hero, Dorothy, leaving her home of Kansas, home being the moon, um, and entering into this extraordinary world of Oz. And she meets three figures who guide her on her journey. The Scarecrow, who all he wants is a brain, Mercury. Then the Tin Man, all he wants is a heart, Venus. And the Cowardly Lion, all he wants is courage, Mars. And furthermore, she meets two powerful witches, the good witch, Jupiter, and the wicked witch, Saturn. So even this tale that is so embedded symbolically in our culture carries these astrological principles in a really beautiful and clearly illustrated way. And on this day of the waxing quarter moon, we can really see an activation of all those archetypal principles coming forward. So that's a lot on the waxing quarter moon. Let's move now to the full moon. And our full moon takes place in Libra. So the sun at this point is in a very tight conjunction to Venus. In fact, just 3 days before the Libra full moon will be on March 28th. 3 days before, on March 25th, which some may know as the Annunciation in Christianity. It's also the day of the ring's destruction in the Lord of the Rings. So March 25th is a very significant day for some of us. That is the day that the sun and Venus, who have been in this long dance with each other, Venus has been tracking so close to the sun's movement for many weeks and will continue to do so. The Sun Venus conjunction really is one of the dominant themes throughout this whole lunation cycle. And they finally make their exact alignment on March 25th, this very significant day. And at that moment of Cazimi is the word for when a planet is in the heart of the sun, it disappears into the light of the sun, that exact conjunction. And it marks Venus's transition from the morning star, so visible in the early morning, to the evening star. And we won't see Venus yet in the evening because she's still so close to the sun. But as they do move further apart, we're going to be able to see Venus once more in the evening sky, and we can adore her diamond beauty at a much more reasonable hour, unless you happen to be someone who wakes up quite early in the morning. And so that shift will be marked March 25th, from Venus moving from the morning to the evening star. And just 3 days after that, as the sun and Venus are still very, very close to each other, they're still at the same degree, minutes apart, they will oppose the moon in Libra. And so the moon will be in Venus's sign of rulership. So this overall is a very Venusian full moon. And I was thinking the other day about the nature of the full moon. And many of you may be familiar with the idea that, or the fact rather, that emergency rooms tend to have far more patients admitted at the full moon, and that there are a number of other psychological emergencies, physical emergencies that tend to happen under the full moon. There's a heightened activity. And we can even think of the the term lunacy, luna, the moon, lunacy, that there's this kind of craze that's brought forward at the full moon. Everything in the over the nighttime is more active. Many people have trouble sleeping at the full moon. Animals, nocturnal animals, will hunt under the full moon more than they will at other times of the lunation cycle. And it is the moon's nature to symbolize that which solar consciousness is unconscious of. So it's not as simple as saying the moon is the unconscious. It's rather what solar rational consciousness is unaware of or unconscious of. And so these are, the moon instead symbolizes the kind of consciousness that is associated with emotion, with feeling, with embodied knowing and consciousness, with intuition. And so at the full moon, the sun illuminates those qualities. It illuminates, it brings forward into the brightness, not of day, but the brightness of night, those intuitive, emotional, relational, inner forms of consciousness, inner ways of knowing. And so when those ways of knowing, those forms of lunar consciousness are not as readily incorporated into valid ways of knowing, then when they're highlighted, things tend to go awry. We are more emotional. We are more prone to outbursts. We are more prone to physical accidents. And I think that illumination of the moon and its archetypal principles that takes place at the full moon it may be part of why we see more admittance to the emergency room or more calls to different psychological hotlines or psychiatric help, because those lunar qualities are being illuminated, they're being brought to the fore, and they're saying, please pay attention to me, because we do so often forget those uh, lunar forms of knowing in our culture, and we disparage them. We consider them not as important as the solar ways of knowing. And the full moon reminds us to live a balanced life between solar and lunar. With Venus there as part of the full moon and that extra Venusian layer, because the moon is in Venus's sign of Libra, this full moon is going to bring forward Venusian themes of love, of the heart, of sweetness, tenderness, aesthetics, and all of those different qualities of Venusian harmony and gifts and values. So seeing the various ways in your own life that this full moon may manifest with all of those Venusian tinges, making it all the more beautiful, all the more exquisite, as we're already seeing in a different way with this new moon coming in just a couple days. So now moving to the waning quarter moon. Our waning quarter moon takes place in Capricorn. And because the moon is in rulership in Cancer, when it's in Capricorn, it struggles to express itself as fully. And so the moon can have some limitations. The moon is so soft and nourishing and nurturing. It carries that maternal caring quality. And when it's in Capricorn, we can think of those nurturing, caring qualities as coming through in more Saturnian practical ways. So making sure you have your needs met, but maybe not in a soft, cushioned way, but more in a concrete, disciplined, practical way. You have everything you need? Okay, good, you're set. That kind of quality. And so the moon in this waning quarter to the sun, whenever we enter that closing part of the lunation cycle, it's bringing things back home. It's bringing whatever our intentions were, or however we open the lunation, back towards a close. It isn't closing yet. We haven't reached the new moon quite yet, but we're preparing toward the close of the cycle. And so with the moon in Capricorn, it brings forward those themes in a way that is really practical. So, what are the tasks that need to be concluded, really in service of the lunation's intended achievements? And so, it may look like kind of putting things back together in an order of, oh, okay, I have all those things to check off the list, and um, it may feel like we can't be quite as emotionally expressive as we were perhaps at other points in the lunation cycle. So a little bit more emotionally grounded and discerning as we look at this closing, waning quarter moon. Now, coming to the Aries new moon, which will take place on April 11th. Oh, that waning quarter moon in Capricorn, that Capricorn Saturn ruled time-based nature wants me to remind you when it happens. It'll happen on April 4th. And so then finally the Aries new moon will take place April 11th in the evening. And so you can see Venus is still very close to the sun and the moon now. Really beautiful alignment. Mercury is going to be in Aries as well. So we've got another stellium stacked up here in this sign. And on the day of the new moon in Aries, with Venus nearby, Venus makes its exact square to Pluto. And the Venus Pluto dynamic is very much the beauty and the beast kind of dynamic. The Hades Persephone myth, as I've talked about at other times. The last Venus Pluto alignment that we had, interestingly, it was a conjunction. So it was when Venus was back here conjunct Pluto. So it was the beginning of that cycle between those two planets, between Venus and Pluto. That Venus Pluto conjunction happened at the full moon in January. And so now this Venus Pluto square, the next hard aspect between these two, interestingly, takes place at the new moon. So something's happening here between Venus Pluto alignments and the sun moon alignments, full moon, new moon, as it's unfolding thus far in its cycle. And so Venus in the square to Pluto is the descent of Venus, the descent of love, of the heart, of romance, of friendship, of attraction, desire, sexuality, sensuality. It's the descent of that beautiful goddess into Pluto's underworld, into the realm of initiation, into those depths. And this dynamic between Venus and Pluto, between Aphrodite or Persephone and Hades, but also Dionysus, that myth was it's an ancient myth. It's actually older even than those names that I'm using, those Greek names that I'm using to tell the myth, Persephone and Hades or Dionysus. It's an even older myth that was brought into that tradition. We can look at it as all of those different figures by different names. So the story of Persephone and Hades and Demeter and Hermes, of Persephone's descent into the underworld and initiation into becoming queen of the underworld, and then her ascent brought back up by the messenger of the gods, Hermes, to the upper world, and her reuniting with her mother Demeter, and how the seasons are marked by Persephone's journey. When she is in the underworld, that symbolizes autumn and winter. And when she was in the upper world, when Demeter is bringing forth new life from the earth, that is when Persephone is with her mother once more in spring and summer. And The cycle continues by Persephone's own choice. When she was in Hades' underworld, she chose to eat 6 seeds of the pomegranate. And those 6 seeds symbolize the 6 months that she spends there as his queen, as queen of the underworld. And so this story, in many ways, signifies an initiation into that realm and a taking power within that realm. She becomes the queen. She is not an abductee who stays a victim. She owns that power and makes the choice to eat those 6 seeds. And then she does indeed return to her mother for the other 6 months of the year, but then chooses that initiation once more with the cycle of the seasons. And that ancient myth, that seasonal myth, was at the core of the Eleusinian mystery rites. And while we know very little about the Eleusinian mystery rites, they were a a yearly initiation that was available to all peoples of Athens. So, whether one was a citizen or a slave, whether one was a man or a woman, you were able to partake in these initiation rites, the Eleusinian mysteries. And we only know, even though they were bound by secrecy, a few people wrote about them. And they were an initiation into uh, the death rebirth mystery itself, which we also see in the seasons. And participants, initiates, would partake of a psychedelic medicine, the ergot fungus, which grows on grain. And actually, the ergot fungus is what was synthesized by Albert Hofmann in Switzerland that became the LSD molecule. So there is this connection between LSD 25 synthesized in a chemist lab in Switzerland and these ancient Eleusinian mystery rites. And uh, they, we know that Plato was initiated. We know that Socrates was initiated into these mysteries, and that at the core of Platonic philosophy, the emergence from the cave of shadows into the light of the sun, seeing the the sun itself, the world of or the ideal realm of forms, perceiving that directly, the philosopher's quest seems very much to be connected to his initiation through these mystery rites. So I bring all that forward because we have this Venus Pluto square that is correlating with the Aries new moon, which I will be discussing in our final one of these forecast workshops. And so, just to hold that in mind as we move through this lunation cycle, the Pisces new moon being marked by Venus, Neptune, that transcendent form of Venusian beauty, and then the Aries new moon being marked by Venus, Pluto, that descendant form of Venusian love and beauty. So, just to say a few more words about what to expect in this lunation cycle. As I mentioned, there are many sextiles unfolding during this lunation. We've touched on some of them, but certainly not all of them. So I'll just name them and the dates. And while I'll just be touching on these here, if you need a reminder, you want a reminder, as always, I am posting the transit updates that I always write on my website. Those will be available very soon. They go out in my newsletter as well. And of course, I'll be posting them day by day as they unfold throughout the month as well on my social media accounts. So if you need a reminder or you want to download those transit updates, they can really act well both as a guide moving forward into the month and also as a retrospective to reflect on what has passed day by day, week by week, month by month. So the first sextile that we get to expect, that we get to see in this month, is Sun sextile Pluto, which will take place on March 16th. Sun with Pluto, it really brings that highlighting and emphasis to the Plutonic. So the underworld, the shadow, the hidden pieces, highlighting it, bringing it forth for transformation, transmutation. But as is the case with all of these sextile examples I will give, gently doing so, gently nudging us toward that transmutation rather than insisting on it so fiercely. Then just 2 days later, on March 18th, Venus sextiles Pluto. And that actually will happen the same day as the waxing crescent. So the waxing crescent is when the sun is sextile the moon. So 60-degree angle there. The sun will be sextile the moon. Remember, Venus is close to the sun, so Venus will be sextile the moon, and Venus will be sextile Pluto. So it's forming what I like to call a humble trine. It's a term I made up for two sextiles that are held together by a trine. It's the inverse of a grand trine, which is three trines. So a humble trine, not so grand, a little bit more petite, but two sextiles and that trine. So that'll be Sun Venus at the midpoint, sextile the moon on one side, sextile Pluto on the other, and then a trine between the moon and Pluto that day. And so while that can have a lot of kind of gentle, sweet energy, Pluto will come in, those kind of deep rumblings of desire below the surface. Our next sextile, which is one that I already mentioned, is that Mercury sextile Uranus, the one that will awaken and quicken the mind, March 21st, same day as the waxing quarter moon. Our next sextile is Venus sextile Saturn, which will take place March 30th. So this is the opening of the cycle between Venus and Saturn. At the beginning of February, we had a Venus-Saturn conjunction. So you can always think of these, even though they're different planets, think of them like the sun-moon relationship. So the conjunction is the beginning of the cycle, in this case between Venus and Saturn. So it opens up first to the sextile. That's what we're getting here. So a gentle relationship between Venus and, in this case, Saturnian principles, where this might show up as a little bit of heartache, but not too strong, little bittersweetness. Often old lovers or partners or friends will come back into one's life at that time or reach out in some way, or you may just be reminiscing. You may find that your aesthetic taste is a little simpler or more dialed down, a little bit more conservative, or dressed all in black or something like that. But again, gently being offered. I think I would mark it March 30th just by sitting down quietly with a good piece of very dark, bittersweet chocolate. That carries Venus Saturn in a clear and understandable way. Then immediately on the heels of that Venus-Saturn sextile, because the sun and Venus are so close, the sun comes into a sextile with Saturn very next day. So March 31st. The sun with Saturn has more of the quality of just emphasizing Saturnian, that Saturnian principle. So bringing forward themes around organization, discipline, structure, work, but not necessarily in Saturn's usual judgmental way of like, get your stuff together, more in the sense of, come on, this is a good moment to just get those files in order, or to follow, up with those people that you need to follow up with. That kind of Saturnian discipline gently coming in with that sextile from the sun. Then again, the very next day, April 1st, Mercury moves into a sextile with Pluto. So while as before it was sextile Uranus, awakened mind, now sextile to Pluto, it deepens the mind and drives the inquiry inward. And so there can be this investigative quality, the impulse to make sure no stone hasn't been turned yet, that you really kind of look into the crevices and cracks of ideas and knowledge, but subtly, softly, gently. I don't think we'll be as prone to the usual Mercury Pluto paranoia, or that kind of intensified thinking that can come with Mercury Pluto. It'll be more of I can see this coming through in deep conversations where it's not superficial, but rather going into the deep things and actually that feeling more accessible. I think the nature of the sextile will offer that to us, where we can more easily draw in um, what we need to talk about with people. Then our next sextile will take place April 6th, and this is Venus forming a sextile to Mars. And so a confluent dance between these two lovers, Venus and Mars, can have a nice balance to it. It's the graceful athlete. It's the performer, the singer, the dancer. So you may feel more artistically inspired with this transit. You may feel more socially active as well. Um, Again, this is a really nice alignment to have between these two, holding them in balance. That takes place April 6th. And there's this interesting parallel between, so I just talked about that humble trine that's going to take place March 18th between Sun, Venus, sextile Pluto, and the moon. That's at the waxing crescent, the waxing sextile between the sun and the moon. And interestingly, this one takes place at the balsamic moon, so the waning crescent between the sun and the moon. So again, we've got sun and Venus still just sticking there together, and they're sextile to the moon again, but on the other side, and sextile to Mars in this case. So we're just swapping out Pluto for Mars at the beginning of the cycle compared to the end of the cycle. And so that shift of Pluto in the dynamic on March 18th, Pluto again, it has more of those hidden elements, those deep, deepened qualities of desire. Whereas when we move to this later humble trine, now with Mars instead of Pluto, Mars is better able to take action, to assert that connection, and so I can really see this being an emotionally connective and socially active kind of transit coming through. And finally, our last two sextiles, you see there's quite a few of them, there's almost a dozen of them. This will take place April 10th, so the day before the new moon. And here we have Mercury sextile to Saturn at the same time as we have Venus sextile to Jupiter. And what's interesting about this is that Mercury and Venus are both in Aries, and Saturn and Jupiter are both in Aquarius. So they're right in tandem with each other, but not quite close enough to be in really tight aspect. They're still activating each other to a certain degree, but they're a bit wider. And so you have the Mercury Saturn at the same time as the Venus Jupiter. And this can come through as, so the Venus Jupiter has this generous, open hearted, luxurious, opulent quality. We talked about that very significantly when there was the Venus Jupiter conjunction during the last lunation. Now they're moving to this harmonious sextile. And, but the Mercury Saturn may come in and say, Mercury Saturn kind of limits the mind. It narrows the mind. It's a little bit more critical, discerning, careful. And so we may notice on this day a little bit of a dichotomy between the mind and the heart, or between the intellect and the senses, because the Mercury Saturn may be in more of a practical and kind of task oriented place, whereas the Venus Jupiter may be more in this opulent, luxurious, indulgent place. And so, again, it's going to be gentle, so it won't be kind of terribly contradictive, but there just may be a little bit of that tension between, oh, all I want to do is lie on this couch in a silk robe and eat chocolates out of a box while rose petals fall around me. And the Mercury Saturn is sitting there thinking, this is the least practical thing you could be doing right now. Do we really need to spend our time this way? So we'll see how that comes through. So that is a tour of the many sextiles that we'll be experiencing in this lunation. It is definitely a time of 60-degree angles, a lack of retrogrades, and really a moving forward into spring. And a sense that the snows are going to be melting. They're going to be turning into Piscean waters just as the world begins to warm and everything starts to move into that heated realm of Aries.